I always hate these chairs because when you're as short as I am,
Yeah,
you can't touch the
feel,
ground.
I feel for you.
Yeah. I always feel like I'm going to fall over. Anyway, I'm not checking my email. I have notes on my phone. I've gone totally paperless. But anyway, I'm Dan Scholnick. I'm a general partner at Trinity Ventures. We're an early stage technology venture capital firm based here in San Francisco. We make a lot of investments and have made a lot of investments in cloud computing companies. I'm on the board of New Relic as well as .cloud, and I'll introduce Ben here in a minute, and other companies that you may see around here at the conference today and tomorrow, such as Loggly, Cloud Scaling, and Mongo HQ. Before joining Trinity, I founded a company called Flurry, which is the leading analytics service and advertising network for mobile applications. And before that, just to give you a little bit of my history with New Relic and Lou Cerny, who's the CEO of New Relic, who I'm sure you all heard spoke this morning. I've known Lou for quite a long time, since 1999, actually. I was the second person that Lou hired at Wiley Technology, which was his previous company. And as Lou will tell you, he hired me as an intern out of college, and he will tell you, be nice to your interns, because someday they may give you millions of dollars. So anyway, with that, I'd like to introduce our two panelists. So all the way to my left is James Waters. James heads up product marketing and ecosystem for Cloud Foundry at Pivotal. And before Pivotal, he was a senior manager of business development for vCloud at VMware. And before that was in corporate strategy and product marketing roles at Sun Microsystems. And directly to my left is Ben Golub. Ben is the CEO at .cloud, which is the company behind the Docker open source project. Before joining .cloud, he was the CEO at Gluster, which was the company behind the open source project Gluster FS, which was acquired by Red Hat for $136 million. And before that, he was the CEO at Plaxo, which was acquired by Comcast. And before that, he was CMO and SVP of Marketing and Government Affairs for VeriSign. And he even did more stuff before that, but I think that gives you a sense for who Ben is. Both of these guys have great open source credentials, and so works well with the topic of this panel today. So wanted to just get started by having you both describe the open source projects that you're involved in, since they're both pretty important open source projects as it pertains to cloud.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So again, I'm at .cloud, which these days is far better known as the company behind Docker. And Docker is an open source project. We started in April of this year. We like to call ourselves the open source container engine, which, depending on whether I'm talking to my mother or talking to a CIO, I describe differently. But basically, Docker lets you take any application and its dependencies and package them up in a lightweight container that can run virtually anywhere, or virtually on any Linux server, whether it's virtualized or not, whether it's Red Hat or Ubuntu, whether it's in the cloud or not. And so what we like to say is that you can package things, you can build things once, developer worries about what goes inside of the container, and then stops worrying, and operators start worrying about managing containers rather than trying to manage heavy VMs or trying to get developers to act in some way that developers are not genetically programmed to act.
Yeah, so I'm James Waters, and I'm the head of the product group for Cloud Foundry at Pivotal. And Cloud Foundry is an open source project that was started by VMware in 2011 that we've been working on for a long time. And we're finally going to ship our first GA product for it next month, so that's pretty exciting. And Cloud Foundry is the radical idea that in a cloud stack you should put the developer first. So there's a lot of automation products in the world. There's a lot of infrastructure and virtual machine control planes. And Cloud Foundry says, we're going to abstract thousands of servers into a simple use developer API so the developer can be productive very quickly. And it doesn't matter if the application has a small or large scale, that API and that interface is all going to be the same. And we're taking that productive developer API to large enterprises and trying to free them from the last 10 years of cruft they developed, because that's really slowed their iteration cycle. And if you look at how disruptive software is being built today, it's being built with a very fast iteration cycle. And that's a message that's appealing to a lot of large enterprises right now. So it's pretty interesting to have both an open source and enterprise appealing project.
Great. Ben, maybe you could just talk for a moment about the history of .cloud, because you have some experience with platform as a service.
Right. So .cloud started life a couple of years ago as a public platform as a service business. And platform as a service, I think back then, was a model where you offered developers one or a limited set of stacks to build on. And when they built their application, you would run it on your infrastructure. And I think that was great and revolutionary at the time. But I think clearly we saw a lot of the same things that James sees, which is that developers, of course, want infinite flexibility, so they want a lot more languages and frameworks to build on. And ultimately, they don't want to have to be stuck with any particular infrastructure. They might want to be private. They might want to be public. They might want to be hybrid. They want to move. And what developers really want to do is be able to rapidly and iteratively build applications that are loosely coupled together and never worry about where they're going to run. That should be somebody else's problem. And so I think our view of PaaS is that ultimately PaaS is no longer or what PaaS should be is no longer, some applications run on public infrastructure, but a way to create PaaS-like environments wherever the user wants to be. And I think Cloud Foundry is taking an approach of providing that, and we have changed our focus to say, well, let's be the container format that makes it possible for people to build PaaS-like environments internally, externally, build PaaS on top of us, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I think what Docker and .cloud really demonstrated was there was an existing technology. I worked on containers at Sun in 2006, and we were a little beleaguered at the time, and I kind of thought they'd be our salvation. We brought containers to the market super early, but we never made them developer friendly. And I think it's interesting to watch this year how Hacker News finally discovered containers, and the reason is that developer friendliness that Docker and .cloud brought. And I think that speaks to the whole reason of this sort of the zeitgeist of PaaS, which is until it's easy for a developer to use and explain in 5 minutes to somebody else, it might not really become a truly influential technology in sort of this era of development when you have, I think worldwide now, 40 million developers potentially, that might not be as expert as, like, say, in the 1970s when you worked your whole life for 20 years to then develop an application. Now you might, within 6 months was at one point the average age of a mobile developer on the stack that they were on. So it's a completely different kind of demographic generation that we're in.
My impression is that, and I don't think this will be a controversial statement, but there's a lot of dissatisfaction or disappointment in the marketplace with PaaS. And I know we're here to talk about open source.
VCs have been disappointed.
Okay.
VCs have made horrible bets in PaaS and have been obliterated. But that's a little bit different, right?
I don't think anyone's been obliterated.
Yeah.
So why do you think that Cloud Foundry then will be different than all of these big craters that we've seen in the PaaS market?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of good friends that are venture capitalists. My ex-boss, Jerry Chen, is now a partner at Greylock, and so I say this with all respect. But they oftentimes follow patterns that are very immediate. And so when Heroku was sold for a lot of money, I thought, hey, that's a good thing to do. And what they didn't see is that ultimately that might not have been that successful financially for Salesforce, and there wouldn't be follow-on investment. What we see is that the most money that comes out of PaaS is from enterprises who really have thousands of developers that need to work together. And they need a dedicated PaaS. They need their own PaaS that they can buy and own and have in their data center. And we see very, very strong demand for that. A lot of the public PaaSes that were funded by venture capital following the Heroku model were only on Amazon, only multi-tenant, no role-based access control, no security isolation, and in fact, some of them not even very broad language support. So you take all of the influential and big money buyers out of the market, and I call that robbing a vegetable stand. So that's the inside joke that I have with my friends about public PaaS is that, yeah, it was an attempt to rob a vegetable stand, not a bank. And you can only ever make so much money by doing that.
What about all the companies and developers that aren't at big companies and can't afford to build out massive data centers and have sophisticated IT teams? What do we have for them?
Well, I mean, I think that PaaS as a way to attract developers is great, right? I mean, so I think that if you are a infrastructure provider and you want to offer PaaS-like services is fantastic. If you are a standalone public PaaS, your business model is let's give away a lot for free to developers to attract them to your platform. When they are on your platform, write a large check every month to Amazon or Rackspace, and when they're successful, they leave you. And that's not a model for success. On the other hand, if your model is let's attract developers, make them successful, let them focus on building great apps, and then give them a path which is either they continue to monetize on your infrastructure, or their organization is able to build a PaaS-like environment, and you're able to scale the applications, and you're able to make it really flexible for the organization to go from the laptop through test and QA to production, and do that iteratively. That's a great business to be in.
And I do think you have to cater to the average developer who just wants to swipe a credit card and go too. So Cloud Foundry has a hosted service on Amazon that is about 5 times cheaper than Heroku. It'll come out soon. It's integrated with New Relic. You can push button add New Relic to your app as part of the deployment. And the reason it's so inexpensive is that it essentially runs as software for us. We don't have a big ops team behind it. So we've tuned the software enough that people can just onboard to it. And that's also enabled by containers. So you use a container to carve up a large Amazon instance. Amazon charges far more for their small instance per megabyte or gigabyte of memory than the large ones. And the reason they're doing that is they're applying a tax to the low end when you're using that as your app container instead of a container itself. And so by slicing up a big instance with containers, we can actually offer a 3 cents a gigabyte hour price to the average developer off the street, no problem.
All right, moving on from PaaS into open source. What do you guys think the role of open source is in the new cloud world?
I mean, I think I'd start by saying that if you look at almost everything exciting that's happening, whether it's cloud or big data or choose your buzzword, there is an open source project that people are most excited about. I mean, so whether it's big data around Hadoop, or NoSQL around Mongo, or or OpenStack as cloud issues, or PaaS with things like Cloud Foundry, or now containers with Docker, or mobile with Android. Right? It's all being led by an open source project, and I think that is not an accident. I think that as stacks are getting redefined, there's really no other way to get ubiquity and to get the stacks to flexibly tie together than by being open.
Yeah, I mean, amazing things happen when you're open source. I guess this is sort of maybe apple pie, but we found out that Baidu, which is the 4th largest website in the world, was using Cloud Foundry off of a SlideShare presentation that they shared. That they already had 1 billion page views a day in production. And they were able to take the open source, make some small tweaks to make it work for them, get it into production, and now they're feeding us back information about what it looks like. And there's not another open source cloud product in the world that has 4 billion page views a day going through it today. And that's all because we shared, and then they share back. So I don't know how you'd ever hire enough salespeople to go off and convince folks to do that. And you also can't cater to a technical audience with a salesperson, certainly not the likes of a very large web company.
One of the things that I struggle with is a common trend we see in the cloud world is that everything becomes a service. And so instead of interacting with the underlying software and managing and deploying that yourself, you use some MongoDB service in the cloud, like Mongo HQ, for example, one of my portfolio companies. Isn't there some tension there with the idea of open source and being open, in that once you sign up for somebody's service in the cloud, you might be locking yourself into that platform and losing some of the freedom and the openness that open source that you think of when you're adopting open source technologies?
Well, I mean, so I'd say part of our mission as a company is to avoid having cloud lock-in. Right? So that if you're developing your application and you're building it and you're making it into a building it and packing and running it as a Docker container, it can run anywhere. So you're not locked into any particular PaaS or into any particular infrastructure provider, or for that matter, any particular set of tools that are around you. I do think it is true that certain things that people were used to taking as open source. I mean, let's say the operating system, or my previous company, Gluster, which was storage. Some of those things are increasingly being delivered as services, but by the same token, you have an incredible push towards application development being where people find the best of breed, and some of it's delivered as a service and some of it's not And the stuff that you don't want to deal with, you consume as a service, but the stuff that you really care about, you still consume as software. And so, I'll share what, echo what James says. I think if you're building a business, the worst thing to be would be a small proprietary startup. The best thing to be is to, but if you can be open and accept the fact that you're not trying to compete with a large enterprise sales force, you're not going to play golf with every CIO of every New York bank with your team of, in our case, 16 people, but you know that in every New York bank, there are 10 people who are playing around with your product. It's a great thing. And I don't know if you have a thought.
I also think it invites important partnerships. So this morning, the CTO of Huawei was in my office saying, hey, how do we partner? I'm the largest supplier to carriers outside of the United States. How can we use Cloud Foundry in our solutions? IBM called us up and said, hey, we want to make you our PaaS. I think that was pretty important. All of these things allow other people to build a future on your stack, whereas, and the alternative to that is just constant fragmentation. You never quite form a market. I mean, software is inherently a network-based phenomena, so if you don't form a market for it, certainly in the software world, you might be in trouble. I think there's also been some positive things where Google is now contributing back to the container ecosystem by open sourcing some of the work that they've had with containers back, and maybe .cloud can share some of that learning, etc. So there was some paranoia that like Google and Facebook would never share again, and hopefully they continue to do that.
What do you guys think about Amazon's role in this? They've been, they have not embraced open source the way that, say, Rackspace has with OpenStack.
Just another Seattle company, man. I mean, sorry, they just seem like Microsoft Part 2 to me. They don't share a lot. They don't open source a lot. It seems like they're sharing a lot of the same thinking and very closed off. They don't let their employees tweet. It's just a very tightly controlled kind of environment, and they don't share a lot.
So would you tell developers not to use Amazon?
No. I mean, I'd say use the best tool for you. But if you ask me in terms of an open source person, would I think of Amazon as a good open source partner or generally a great partner? I mean, I don't know, how would you feel about partnering with Amazon? It's a pretty dangerous proposition.
Yeah, I mean, so we are sort of aggressively, not aggressively, right? We're open, and lots of people want to partner with us, which is fantastic. But our standard line to everybody is our whole reason for being is to make things interoperable.
Yeah.
Right, and so people who share that philosophy and say, okay, you get and you keep customers by offering great services, not by creating artificial barriers to them leaving,
right,
are naturally attracted to working with us. And so, we're excited to be working with Red Hat. We're excited to be working with a lot of the folks in the OpenStack community. We've got great conversations going with the folks at Cloud Foundry. And I think it's people who share that view that says, developers ultimately will go, and the dollars will ultimately go towards those who provide the best of breed things, and those that give developers the flexibility to build what they want. And you can really only do that by being open, because at the end of the day, so for example, for us, we started life, 6 months ago. 2 months in, we came up with this long list of services that we wanted to integrate with. Mm-hmm. And we said, God, how the hell are we going to integrate with, with the Chef, with Puppet, with be compatible with Red Hat, do Travis, do Jenkins. And then 2 weeks later, we said, oh, never mind, we don't have to do that. The community has already done it for us. Or those companies have done it for us. And you can't do that if you're closed.
James, any other thoughts, or should I move on here? So what do you guys think the most important, other than your own open source projects, so let's leave Docker and Cloud Foundry out of this for just a minute. What do you guys think the most important open source projects are in terms of enabling the cloud and cloud usage?
Yeah, I think...
like what kind of stuff should everyone here be keeping an eye on? Other than, everyone should be using Cloud Foundry and Docker. That's a given.
If it fits. I think what I find the interesting tension is there's projects that do very well with very few contributors. And actually, I think .cloud originally was mostly Solomon and a few people working very hard together. And there's other projects like Redis, which is owned by Pivotal, but we really just sponsor it. It's just 2 people that work on it. We don't charge for it. There's no money collected. Nginx is another interesting example of a very small open source project. And these algorithmically complex projects are kind of fascinating to me because you couldn't add more people to them and get a better result, right? You don't make a better Redis algorithm by adding more people to it. So I guess in terms of what's fascinating me lately, it's the asymmetry between sometimes the number of people you have on a project and how successful it is. And I think that's one of the interesting trends I see in open source. And that's not exactly the answer to your question, but Instagram, Twitter, all these big shops are using Redis, which was developed by essentially 2 people.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll do a backdoor brag about how being open, and then I'll answer your question. It's very awkward to have your VC interview you in front of hundreds of people while it's being recorded. So you have to.
Yeah, and it's
This
bad
is
for all of you guys because I'm
this
not
is
going to call them
recorded?
out on it.
Yeah, but no, but so I think we've been struggling. How do you measure momentum? But one of the interesting things we've seen is that developers have embraced us both in terms of usage, but also in terms of contribution. So our next release has 80 contributors. We're 14 people, so you can do the math. But I think when you look at what projects are interesting, it's not just how many people are contributing to it, but how many projects around it are integrating into it. And I think if you see that, use that as your metrics, then you can see what's going to be important. And so obviously, Hadoop is important. It's nothing new here, right? I think Mongo is important. Cloud Foundry is important. I think OpenStack, whether it will succeed or not, I think is a different question. But certainly the number of people who are placing bets on OpenStack as an alternative to AWS is incredible. And I think you can't ignore that.
The one other one I'd add that has surprised me, because I used to think Mongo was really kind of had a very early lead with that developer usability, has been Cassandra. And I've seen it all over the place in the enterprise. I think it's appealing because it's written in Java. So that appeals to some people in the enterprise. And it also has a much more scalable operational model. So you continue to add nodes, and they're much more generic than in a Mongo approach. So I've seen a lot of people kind of like leaving that approach to go to Cassandra lately.
Yeah, but I think you also want to look for something that is not just a cheaper version of something proprietary, but something that is radically different and enabling, and that its power comes from being part of a stack, right? So you look at something like I'll even just go back to Linux, right? And why was Linux so powerful? It wasn't just that it was an open version of Unix, but it enabled the entire stack that was built on top of it, right? And it added value also by commoditizing the hardware, right? And so I think projects like that enable a stack become really, really interesting.
Ben, you mentioned OpenStack. OpenStack is a little bit like the early PaaS market in that there's a lot of dissatisfaction and disappointment among early adopters, particularly as it comes to how many companies have successfully deployed clouds on OpenStack. What do you think is going to happen with that project?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the project has certain challenges, in that it has chosen to be very open in terms of governance and in terms of participation. So we have lots of people who are part of the governance and who are major contributors who also compete with each other. So that can be good or that can be bad. I think it was a fair complaint to make at one point in time that there are probably more people contributing to OpenStack than deploying it. But I think that is rapidly changing. There are some there's some very high-profile users of OpenStack, both sort of an enterprise and service provider model. And I also think that the project itself is getting much better at defining what's core and what's not core. So there was a period when, every OpenStack conference there were, 5 new named projects that were part of OpenStack, which I don't think that's a model for clean development. But let's wait and see. But I think there is so much demand for enterprises and service providers to have a cloud-like environment that offers the flexibility of Amazon without the expense or the lock-in, that something's got to win. Whether it's OpenStack or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I think you have to find your unit of value, though, and it's gotten to be a very broad project. And I think one thing Docker did very well is it found a tight unit of value for a very specific use case, a very specific person. And then you can grow the ecosystem around that initial proven unit of value. And I think Cloud Foundry is a large project. Actually, wasn't super easy to install the last couple of years, so it wasn't as easy to just say, hey, I used it on my own as software and I'm going with it. So I understand OpenStack's challenges in terms of having a very large unit of value. But we have a really great partnership with Piston Cloud, and they've built a very easy to install, easy to get started version of OpenStack, and they're successful because people download that, install it, use it, then call them up, and so they have some of the virtues of that, kind of viral adoption. And we've had a great integration with them. Every day, Cloud Foundry gets built out and tested on Piston Cloud. So I think there's some early signs of great success for us in OpenStack.
Good. One of the things I want to ask you about, James, is VMware, because obviously virtualization is an important technology component of the cloud.
Sure.
It seems to be moving towards open source, and now we have this other virtualization or containerization technology called Docker. What do you think What do you think VMware's role in this, and what's going to happen to them?
Yeah, VMware just had a good quarter, and I think a lot of the groupthink is around mistaken inevitability. I think that's probably the largest mistake Silicon Valley makes is, oh, this is inevitable, like Friendster is going to be inevitable and take over the world, right? And we all know that, what happened there. MySpace is inevitable, it's going to take over the world. And I think we all want to be part of those inevitabilities when they happen, so we cherish them. At the same time, VMware has continued to perform very well. And I think one of the challenges that you have as OpenStack is that VMware is very mature, and its buyers are not 100% cost sensitive; they're value sensitive. And as Ben said, you don't always just want to be a cheap knockoff that doesn't enable something radically new. And I think that's why platform as a service would be an area to do open source innovation today, because you enable a whole new set of apps, you enable enterprises to build apps faster, et cetera. That's sort of a radically new value proposition. I think it'll be hard to go in and sort of take out the entrenched VMware market for the same reason that Microsoft Server still has 50% of the market, right? It's just an OS. You're like, why would you pay for that in the age of Linux? But there they are with 65% market share of the server market because people feel comfortable with that solution and they're value conscious, not cost conscious.
But do you think as companies move to modern clouds that look like AWS or OpenStack or whatever it is, that VMware has a role to play, and their virtualization technology has a role to play in that ecosystem?
Yeah, I think I can't say I know too much, so I can't tell you everything that they're working on. But they have some very interesting things in a scale-out cloud in terms of R&D that the public doesn't know about that will be very interesting to folks.
Ben, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that abstraction is always a good thing, but you need to provide the abstraction layer that makes sense for particular use cases. And I think sort of the traditional VM was created when the problem was you had a sprawl of single-purpose servers. And so you replaced that. You were able to take your Mac print server and your Microsoft Exchange server and your custom Linux inventory app and take all those single-purpose servers and virtualize them and put them on a single host. But to some extent, you've replaced one problem with, okay, now I've got to manage a bunch of virtual servers, when what I really want to do is manage apps for a lot of what the cloud is about. I want the app to be the unit of abstraction rather than hardware. And so I think there are going to be lots and lots of use cases where the container model wins, but there are still a hell of a lot of use cases where hardware virtualization is the right abstraction.
And to be fair, it was VMware that put $250 million of R&D into Cloud Foundry, which is a container-based application-centric tech. So I think Paul Maritz got that.
Yeah, no, and I think you have to distinguish between VMware as a company from VMs as a
it's sort of
technology.
like vSphere is different than VMware.
Yeah.
You've also seen them expand out into network virtualization as well. So.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think I hear clapping in the other room, and I've got 4 o'clock on my cell phone, so I think we're out of time. But I want to thank both of these guys for taking the time and a good discussion. And thank you all for coming.